Hotel Maids of Reddit, what was the most disturbing thing you found while cleaning out a room? Naked man in bath. I was 16. Knocked and called loudly before I walked in. He sat there with a big creepy grin on his face and visible erection. Gross. I was a housekeeper on an island resort. And we had contractors living there during the week building a new high-rise. They would go home for the weekend and we had to clean their sheet. They were getting free accommodation. And didn't give a shit. They were always ducked. We cold plates of food. Spilt bong water etc. But the most confusing moment was in the bottom of a fridge. There was a layer of sand a couple of cm thick. And rock hard. So I proceed to chip away at the sand biscuit, and as I do so, I start to see small curly hairs appearing. Loads of them. To this day I still don't know how so many pubes got into the sand. In the bottom of a mini fridge. And what acted as the binding agent. Not sure I want to know. Really. I had a summer job cleaning hotel rooms. One day a co-worker told me she walked into her first room that day and the first thing she saw, neatly arranged on the desk, were 3 dildos. A note saying please wash, and a 20 crown note, about $2. She didn't. Late to another post. My grandma used to clean hotel rooms and I used to go with her because it's a laid-back job and nobody else could watch me. My grandma was cleaning and I was sitting on the counter playing my DS. I wanted to get a drink, so checked to see if there was ice in the freezer. There was no ice. But there was a popsicle box. I got so excited. I ran into the bathroom and asked my grandmother if I could have a popsicle. Assuming they were in plastic wrap. She said yes. I ran back to the freezer and reached into the cardboard box and pulled out a long purple dildo covered in sheet. Human feces. I was 7. My first job as a teenager, I was a hotel maid. I've seen a lot of weird shit. But one situation that stood out was this creepy old man who would hit on me and my friend. Every time we would clean his room, the top drawer of his dresser would be open with what seemed to be a strategically placed unused condom that legit was like from the 1970s. I guess he never got to use it. Not a hotel maid story. But my brother used to do cleaning maintenance work for the dorm buildings at his university. A water pipe burst in one of the dorm buildings over winter break. So he had to go into a bunch of people's rooms to box up their stuff and check for water damage. One of the rooms he had to enter was absolutely wallpapered with photos of a female student. There were hundreds of weird candid shots taken of her around campus. Sitting in class. Eating in the dining hall. etc. Printed out on printer paper and stuck up all over the walls. A university staff member had unlocked the door for him. And when they realized what they were looking at, she told him to leave and relock the room. My brother never found out what was going on. But he was called back to do final cleaning of that same room, now totally empty, a couple of weeks later. Whoever was living there had left the dorm or been kicked out. I worked as a housekeeper in a small motel for maybe 2 months. One day we had to clean a room covered completely in paper towels. Everything was covered. The bed. The chairs. The floor. Not horrific. But weird. This next one is why I hated my job. And was happy to have gotten fired. We had to clean a room covered in sheet. Human poo. On the bed. On the towels. Everywhere but the toilet. The towels were twisted. And covered like they had been shoved up someone's rectum. And to top it all off, when I asked about being able to use gloves, I was told no. Just grab the sheet covered stuff by the edges where they were sheet free. Grr, I hated that place. I wasn't a hotel maid. But a maid for one of those rent-a-maid companies where we'd have weekly appointments at people's homes. One family had a teenage daughter who had the flu. And she had vomited all over the bathroom floor. They didn't clean it up because they knew I was coming the next day. I did it. Begrudgingly. Expecting to get a $20 tip or something. Didn't get so much as a thank you. I was fired shortly thereafter for not cleaning well enough. I was not all that upset. 5 years in hotel security. Some females have very heavy flows and don't prepare themselves before bed. Several times housekeepers thought it was a crime scene and called us. Also lots of unsecured and loaded firearms. I would just unload them and lock them in the guest safe, then change the code so they could have a short lecture before getting it back. I worked on the front desk of a hotel for 7 years. Housekeeping is very hard work physically and timing is everything. If a room was a checkout, they had 22 minutes to ensure it was back to perfect. Plus their pay conditions are really poor. Anyway, various items over the years were found including Drew Gus. The biggest find was a gum. This is in Australia where we don't really do the whole gum thing. It was found under the bed. It was impossible to trace it back to a guest as beds were only vacuumed under every 6 months. Obviously the police were called in. Another unique find was an untouched room. Basically Chinese tour groups would stay with us and occasionally some would run away. They would leave the hotel in the early hours of the morning through the front door, viewed on CCTV. They planned to seek a better life in Australia. They would only take with them the luggage they had. Should their attempt fail, they can return to any airport and get on a flight back to China. But they will never be allowed to leave China ever again. My mom was a hotel maid and I worked with her during the summers. I remember one day she was done early with her rooms, so she came to help me finish up so we could go home. It's always the last freaking room that takes the price. We walked into the room and were automatically hit with the stench of sheet and vomit. The people staying there were a family of 4 in a suite and were put up because their apartment had flooded or something. Apparently they had refused cleaning for the last week and now we knew why. The bathtub was filled with garbage. One of the walls was smeared with sheet. Their 2-year-old kid had apparently smeared his own feces into the wall and they just left it like that and it had dried up. There was a corner with a mountain of diapers. The older kid had gotten sick, probably from living in that filth, and had thrown up everywhere. And I mean everywhere. My mom and I refused to clean the room. We asked the manager to come and see. It was so disgusting the family got kicked out of the hotel and we had to call a cleaning company to get the dry feces out of the wall. Child Protective Services also came and asked us questions. Just a complete shit show. This isn't an answer to the question posed but a question I am posing. When I travel and get like a 6-pack of beer and then only drink like 4 or 5. And I leave the extra behind in the mini fridge. Do you guys like that? Like, does that go to you? Or do you have to throw it out even though it's unopened and brand new? Cause I do that often and was just curious if I was wasting booze or not. Not a maid, but one time I called one to change the sheets on my bed when I checked in because the sheets had some small blood stains. When I came back, she had just flipped the sheets over and put the blood stains at the other end of the bed. Hearing about ice cube trays perfectly filled with human sheet being found in the minibar at the Hilton stopped me from ever using ice cube trays in hotels again. We had a lady who cleaned hotels tell us about the time she walked in and there were 10 severed heads in the bathtub with the hotel water running. Immediately left the room and had the manager call the police. Tons of police come to investigate with multiple guys with earpieces in place. The gentleman whose room it was came back and was immediately taken down. Turns out he was in charge of an end cadaver lab being held the next AM and needed to thaw the specimens. Tough to explain, but it got sorted out once the heads were all accounted for. Late, but I worked as housekeeping in a hotel for a few months when I was 18. The normal nasty things you tend to see is completely trashed bathrooms. One room which was occupied by construction workers constantly had a clogged toilet. After the second time of dealing with it, I ignored it. I've also had a woman somehow catch the bed on fire while I was cleaning her bathroom. We didn't have any way to communicate to other associates, so I had to run down from the 3rd floor to the 1st to get the manager. The absolute worst thing I've had to deal with was when I kept turning down the offers of 6 to the room of 2 military men. They got super offended that I wasn't interested and went so far to trash the room. Took boxes of Cheez-Its and crushed them all over the floor. So many wasted Cheez-Its smashed into the carpet. Beer cans thrown everywhere. Trash stuffed between the mattresses. Rolls of toilet paper shoved in the toilet. Poop on the walls. It was ridiculous. Manager here. I had a group of high school kids in house one night and the teachers chaperoning the group were non-existent. During the night we got constant complaints about noise from the room. When I went up there all 30 plus kids were in this one room. I kicked them out and sent them back to their rooms, but the best part was the next day. I got the call from the housekeeper that the room was trashed. As I went in to inspect the room we found tons of used condoms and piss all over the bathroom. Not only did we charge the school damage costs for the room, but I also got the pleasure of telling the superintendent of the school that there was a 30 plus kid orgy in the room and the chaperones we know where to be found. What a great day. I don't know which maid ended up having to find this, but a couple of days ago on a road trip, I broke off one of my incisors eating cubita. I know. Hard to do with ground meat. About a centimeter long chunk. Everything but the root. I kept the tooth and had it on the desk in my hotel room. At one point I accidentally knocked it onto the floor and I thought I need to remember to pick that up before I leave. I didn't remember. So I'm just hoping the maid vacuumed it up without noticing what it was. Not a hotel maid, see username. But I did walk in on a guy ducking an inflatable dinosaur pool toy by holding its legs together and thrusting through them. Purple Brontosaurus. For the curious. I worked housekeeping at an upscale beach and during high school. These people would be paying $600 $700/night per person. So you would think they would have some class. I found dirty vibrators. Cum poop covered duvets. And have walked in on people doing the dirty even though it was after checkout time and I knocked multiple times. Some foreign families thought it was okay to bring in electric hot pans and cook chicken curry 24/7. Leaving a greasy and smelly mess in the room. List goes on. But those are the ones that stick out the most. When I was 16 I worked for a Super 8 in Southern Isle. I walked into the room and instantly smelled feces. But nothing looked nasty so I went about stripping the beds and going about my business. I was nearly done with the room and still confused about the odor until I got to the coffee pot. Someone had sheet where the coffee's grounds were supposed to go and made a pot of hot sheet water. I just bagged and threw the whole thing away in the dumpster. I went to the owner and told them what had happened and to request a new pot. I was told to retrieve the old one and just bleach it. I quit right then and there. I still refuse to use coffee pots when I am staying at hotel. Worked front desk at a hotel in Anchorage. There was a native convention going on in town so every hotel was packed. I get a call for some towels and decided to run them up myself. When they opened the door I immediately got a face full of the most disgustingly fishy smell. Right inside the door they had pulled a nightstand out and 4 ladies were gutting a seal with an ulu. Can't imagine how pissed the housekeeping staff was about that. I about gagged from the smell of it. And from the looks of it they weren't trying very hard to keep the guts and juices from getting everywhere. Worked in an upscale high-rise hotel. Gets called from the 2nd floor saying the toilet was overflowing. Turns out the main had backed up and the entire contents of the 24 rooms above him were emptying into his sink, tub, and toilet. There was literally a river of sheet coming out every orifice of the bathroom. The hotel was pretty full so anytime somebody flushed the toilet more sheet and piss. We had to create a towel bridge just so they could walk out of the room. Years ago, I did maintenance and janitorial work at a rather large warehouse distribution facility. I closed off a women's restroom to work on a toilet. There was an alternate functioning restroom nearby. I was laying on my back on a large piece of cardboard, re-securing a toilet to the wall. As I heard footsteps approaching me, I hollered out that the restroom was closed. "I won't be a minute," she said. I strongly and vocally protested to no avail. She quickly sat down in the stool next to the one I was working in and proceeded to take a very loud, noxious dump. Instead of apologizing, she gave me a nasty scolding for trying to deny her access. Dear hotel maids, I apologize for the time my husband drank 2 bottles of Sutter Home and half a dozen chocolate brownies and then spent the night crying and puking in the bathtub, the toilet, the sink, everywhere. I tried my best to clean up what I could, but I'm sure the stink alone ruined your day. I did leave an extra tip. I am so sorry. He has promised never to do it again. Edit, my husband is getting a kick out of everyone's assumptions about him, me, and our relationship. Good ol' Reddit. You crazy kids. I work at a hotel but not a maid myself. Though one day a maid found a woman who committed suicide. She checked in so her family would not be forced to find the body. It was the middle of the day and the hotel was mostly clear of people. Nobody heard the gunshot and we have concrete floors that stop the bullet from traveling out of the room. The way it was described to me was it was relatively clean. She lied in bed and put a pillow on her head and shot through it towards the ground. It wasn't until the cops came that blood got everywhere. The maid soon quit afterwards. This is extremely common in Las Vegas. We're the second most common suicide destination in the United States behind the Golden Gate Bridge. The hotels do their best to bury that information. But when people jump off buildings, parking garages are probably the most common. But 6 have managed to jump off the top of the stratosphere. It's considered a public suicide and will make the news.